The sun had barely risen when the soft sound of padded footsteps echoed through the small enclosure. A young lion cub, not yet fully grown, but already showing the powerful build that would define him as an adult, emerged from the shadows of his sleeping quarters. His golden fur gleamed in the early morning light, and his bright, curious eyes scanned the surroundings with a mix of caution and curiosity. This was the only world he had ever known, a world bounded by high walls and the familiar presence of his caretaker. The caretaker, a middle-aged man with a kind face and weathered hands, was already waiting with the day's first meal. He had raised the cub since it was a tiny, helpless creature, abandoned and alone. The bond between them had been forged from those early days, built on trust, care, and a deep mutual understanding. The man's voice was gentle as he called out to the cub, a warm smile on his lips as he watched the young lion approach. "Good morning, my boy," the man said, kneeling down to offer the food. "Ready for another day?" The cub nuzzled the man's hand before digging into the meal, tail flicking with contentment. As the lion ate, the man sat beside him, watching with a mixture of pride and melancholy. He knew that these moments were fleeting. The cub was growing rapidly, and the day would come when this enclosure would no longer be enough to contain the powerful creature he would become. The man had always known that his role was temporary, that his job was to prepare the lion for the day when he would return to the wild, a place the cub had never known, where he truly belonged. As the cub finished his meal, the man gently scratched behind his ears, a gesture that had become a comforting ritual. The lion closed his eyes and leaned into the touch, a low purr rumbling from deep within his chest. For a moment, they both enjoyed the simple pleasure of companionship, quiet understanding passing between them. But the man's thoughts were elsewhere, already drifting to the future. He stood up, stretching his stiff joints, and glanced around the enclosure. It was a well-designed space, with plenty of room for the lion to roam, but it was nothing compared to the vast savanna where the lion's ancestors had roamed free. The man had spent years preparing for the eventual release, ensuring that the lion would be ready to survive on his own in the wild. They had practiced hunting, stalking, and other behaviors that the lion would need once he was free. The man had done everything he could to prepare him, but he couldn't help but worry about what would happen once the lion was on his own. Later that day, the man led the cub through a series of exercises designed to hone his instinct. They moved together through the enclosure, the man guiding the lion through mock hunts and simulated encounters with other animals. The lion's movements were fluid and powerful, instincts sharp. The man watched with satisfaction as the cub pounced on a decoy, his eyes narrowing in focus. The lion was nearly ready. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the enclosure, the man sat down on a bench near the edge of the habitat, watching the lion as he settled down for the night. The man's thoughts turned to the day that would soon come, the day when he would open the gate and let the lion walk out into the world beyond. It was a day he both anticipated and dreaded. The lion, now resting on the soft grass, looked over at the man, eyes reflecting the fading light. There was a bond between them, one that had been built over years of care and trust. Lion didn't understand what the future held. He trusted the man completely. The man, in turn, felt a pang of sadness at the thought of letting go. He knew it was the right thing to do. The lion was not meant to live out his days in captivity. He was destined for something greater, something wild and free. As the stars began to appear in the sky, the man made his way to the gate, pausing to look back at the lion one last time before he left for the night. The lion watched him go, quiet understanding in his gaze. They had shared many nights like this, and there would be a few more before the final farewell. For now, they had this moment. That was enough. The man closed the gate behind him, his heart heavy with the knowledge of what was to come. The lion, left alone in the enclosure, lay down on the grass and closed his eyes, dreaming of a world he had never seen, a world of endless plains, towering trees, and the call of the wild. The day had finally arrived, the day the man had been preparing for, both eagerly and reluctantly. The sun hung high in the sky, casting a bright, golden light over the reserve. The enclosure gate stood open, a silent invitation to the lion that had spent his entire life within these walls. The man stood just outside the gate, watching as the lion approached with cautious curiosity, unaware of the significance of this moment. The lion, now fully grown and a magnificent sight to behold, moved with a grace that only a creature born to the wild could possess. His powerful muscles rippled beneath his tawny coat as he walked, his amber eyes sharp and alert. But there was a hesitation in his steps as he approached the open gate, glancing back at the man who had always been there, guiding and protecting him. The man's heart ached as he watched the lion, knowing that this was the right thing to do, but struggling with the emotions that accompanied it. He had raised this lion from a cub, watched him grow into the majestic creature he was now. The bond they shared was undeniable, but the man knew that the lion's true place was not within the confines of the reserve. It was out there, in the wild, where he could roam free and live as nature intended. With a deep breath, the man knelt down beside the lion, resting a hand on his powerful shoulder. The lion turned his head, nuzzling the man's hand with a familiarity that brought a lump to the man's throat. This was their final moment together, a silent farewell between two beings who had shared so much. "It's time," the man said softly, his voice barely more than a whisper. "You were never meant to stay here forever. Go on now. This world is yours." The lion looked at the man for a long moment, as if trying to understand. There was a quiet intensity in his gaze, a connection that transcended words. And then, with a low rumble deep in his chest, the lion turned and took his first step beyond the gate. The man watched, his heart pounding, as the lion moved through the opening and into the world beyond. At first, the lion hesitated, his instincts urging him to turn back to the safety of the enclosure. But then the wind carried the scent of the wild, fresh, untamed, full of life. The lion's ears twitched, his nose quivering as he took in the new smells. There was something out there, something calling to him. He took another step, then another, each one more confident than the last. The man stood still, his eyes never leaving the lion as he moved further away. He had known this day would come, but nothing could have prepared him for the reality of it. There was a hollowness in his chest, a sense of loss that he hadn't expected to feel so acutely. But beneath that, there was also pride in what the lion had become, and in knowing that he had played a part in that. The lion continued to move forward, crossing into the savanna, where the tall grass brushed against his legs, and the sky stretched endlessly above him. He paused for a moment, looking back over his shoulder at the man one last time. The man raised a hand, a gesture of farewell that was both simple and profound. The lion seemed to understand, his eyes lingering on the man before he finally turned away and disappeared into the grass. For a long time, the man stood there, staring at the spot where the lion had vanished. The silence around him was deafening, broken only by the distant call of birds and the rustle of the wind through the grass. He had always known that this moment would come, but now that it was here, it felt surreal. The enclosure behind him was empty, and so too was the place in his heart where the lion had once been. Slowly the man turned and walked back to the enclosure, his steps heavy with the weight of the separation. Closed the gate behind him, the finality of the act echoing in his mind. The lion was gone, and the man was left alone with his thoughts, the memories of their time together already beginning to fade like a dream upon waking. As he made his way back to his quarters, the man couldn't help but wonder how the lion would fare in the wild. Would he remember the lessons they had practiced? Would he find his place among the other lions? Or would he struggle to adapt? Questions lingered, unanswered, as the man settled into the quiet that now filled the reserve. The lion, meanwhile, was already miles away, moving through the savanna with a confidence that grew with every step. The sights and sounds of the wild were new and exhilarating, a world that was both foreign and strangely familiar. The lion didn't look back again. His focus was now entirely on the path ahead. The separation was complete, but the bond between them would endure, even if neither fully understood it. The lion was free, as he was always meant to be, and the man was left with the bittersweet knowledge that he had done what was right, even if it had come at a personal cost. The lion's new life in the wild was a stark contrast to the world he had known in captivity. The vast savanna stretched endlessly before him, a mosaic of golden grasses, towering acacia trees, and distant mountains that seemed to touch the sky. The air was alive with the sounds of nature, the distant trumpeting of elephants, the rustle of leaves in the wind, and the low hum of insects. This was a world filled with both beauty and danger, where every day was a test of survival. At first, the lion found himself overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of it all. The enclosure had been a safe, controlled environment, but here in the wild, there were no boundaries, no familiar routines. The freedom he had been granted was exhilarating, but it also brought with it new challenges. He had to learn quickly, relying on instincts that had been dormant during his time in captivity. Hunting, which had once been a game in the enclosure, became a necessity in the wild. The lion had to hone his skills, learning to stalk prey through the tall grass, his body moving with a predator's grace. His first few attempts were clumsy, the prey escaping before he could pounce. But with each failure, he grew more determined, his movements becoming more precise, his patience more enduring. After several unsuccessful hunts, the lion finally made his first kill. A young antelope that had strayed from the herd. The thrill of the hunt coursed through his veins as he sank his teeth into the animal. Taste of fresh blood awakening something primal within him. This was what he was meant to do. What he was born for. The wild was not just a place to live, it was a place where he could truly be himself. As the days turned into weeks, the lion began to establish his territory, marking it with his scent and patrolling its boundaries with the confidence of a ruler. The savanna was vast, but it was also home to many other predators, each vying for dominance. The lion encountered other males, some of whom challenged him for control of the land. These encounters were tense and often brutal, but the lion's strength and determination saw him through each one. He also had to navigate the complex social dynamics of lion prides. At first, he kept his distance, unsure of how to approach the groups of lions he saw in the distance. But eventually, he began to integrate with a nearby pride, drawn to the sense of community and security it offered. Females, wary at first, slowly accepted his presence, and the lion found himself a part of a new family. Yet, even as he adapted to this new life, there were moments when the lion's mind drifted back to his days in the enclosure. He would remember the man who had cared for him, the gentle touch, familiar voice that had guided him through his early years. These memories were fleeting, surfacing only in quiet moments, when the sun was low on the horizon and the world seemed to pause. But they were there, a reminder of a past life was still a part of him. The lion's instincts had taken over, shaping him into the predator he was always meant to be. He was now fully immersed in the rhythm of the wild, his days filled with hunting, patrolling, and resting in the shade during the hottest hours. The wild had become his home, and the lion thrived in it, his body growing stronger, his senses sharper. But the transition had not been without its challenges. The lion had faced injuries, close encounters with other predators, and the harsh realities of life in the wild. Yet each challenge had made him more resilient, more attuned to the world around him. He had learned to trust his instincts, to rely on his strength and cunning to survive. The savanna was unforgiving, but it was also a place of unparalleled beauty. The lion would often find himself standing on a high ridge, looking out over the land as the sun set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. In those moments, he felt a deep connection to the world around him, a sense of belonging that was both primal and profound. The man who had raised him was a distant memory, a figure from a life that now seemed so far away. But the bond they had shared was not easily forgotten. It was woven into the fabric of the lion's being, quiet undercurrent that remained even as he roared his dominance across the savanna. The wild had claimed him, but it had not erased the traces of his past. As the lion settled into his new life, the wild became not just a place of survival, but a place of identity. He was no longer the cub that had relied on a human for care and guidance. He was a king of the savanna, creature of power and grace. Yet, somewhere deep within, the memory of the man lingered, a quiet echo of the life he had left behind. Years had passed since the day the man had watched the lion disappear into the tall grasses of the savanna. He had continued his work at the reserve for a time, caring for other animals, but there was always a lingering sense of something unfinished, a nagging thought he couldn't quite shake. The lion had left an indelible mark on him, and though he had tried to move on, the bond they had shared remained strong in his heart. Now, in his later years, the man found himself reflecting more often on the life he had lived. The world had changed around him. The memory of the lion remained vivid, as if frozen in time. He wondered how the lion had fared in the wild, whether he had found his place among the other predators, whether he had survived. The questions haunted him, growing louder with each passing day. One evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky, casting a warm glow over the reserve, the man sat on his porch, lost in thought. The sounds of the night, crickets chirping, the distant call of a nocturnal bird, filled the air, but his mind was elsewhere, far away on the savannah where he had last seen the lion. His heart ached with the weight of uncertainty. He had always known that the lion's release was the right thing to do, but the lack of closure gnawed at him. What if the lion had struggled? What if he had failed to adapt? Man had no way of knowing, and it was this unknowing that troubled him most. As the stars began to appear in the night sky, the man made a decision. He would return to the savannah, to the place where he had released the lion all those years ago. It was a decision born out of a deep need to reconnect with the past, to see for himself how the lion had fared. He knew it was a risk. There was no guarantee that the lion would even be there, and if he was, there was no telling how he would react. But the man was determined. He had to know. The following days were spent in preparation. The man reached out to contacts who could help him organize the trip, securing the necessary permits and arranging for transportation. He packed lightly, bringing only the essentials: clothes, food, and the old leather-bound notebook in which he had recorded every detail of the lion's upbringing. The notebook was worn, its pages filled with memories of their time together, and the man found comfort in its familiarity. As the day of departure approached, the man's emotions were a mix of anticipation and trepidation. He had no idea what awaited him in the savannah, but he was ready to face it, whatever it might be. The trip itself was long and arduous, taking him from the quiet of the reserve to the vast, open plains where the lion had been released. The journey was a journey back in time to a moment that had shaped both his life and the life of the lion. When he finally arrived at the edge of the savannah, the man was struck by how little had changed. The landscape was as he remembered. Endless stretches of grassland, the occasional acacia tree dotting the horizon, and the soft hum of life all around. It was both familiar and foreign, a place that had once been a second home, now seen through the eyes of an outsider. The guides he had hired to assist him were experienced, well-versed in the ways of the wild, but they were curious about the man's mission. He explained to them his purpose: find the lion he had released years ago, see if their paths might cross once more. The guides exchanged skeptical glances, but agreed to help him. They knew the wild was unpredictable, and the chances of finding a specific lion after so many years were slim. But the man's resolve was unwavering. They set out at dawn, the guides leading the way through the savannah. The man followed closely, his eyes scanning the horizon, searching for any sign of the lion he had once known so well. The sun climbed higher in the sky, and the heat of the day began to settle in. The man paid it no mind. His focus was singular, his thoughts consumed by the possibility of a reunion. As they trekked through the savannah, the man's mind drifted to the years that had passed since he had last seen the lion. He thought of the countless nights he had spent wondering about the lion's fate, the dreams that had haunted him with images of the lion alone and struggling. He had always hoped for the best, but the reality of the wild was harsh, and he knew that survival was not guaranteed. By midday, they reached the area where the man had released the lion. The guides paused, pointing out signs of recent lion activity: cracks in the dirt, claw marks on a tree, the distant sound of a lion's roar. The man's heart quickened at the signs, a glimmer of hope sparking within him. Could it really be the lion he had raised? Was he still out here, alive and thriving? The guides suggested they rest and wait. If the lion was nearby, he would likely make an appearance. The man agreed, though his anticipation made it difficult to remain still. They found a shaded spot beneath a tree and settled in, the man's eyes never leaving the horizon. As the afternoon wore on, the savannah remained quiet. The only sounds, the rustle of the wind and the occasional call of a bird. The man's hope began to waver, doubt creeping in as the hours passed. Perhaps this had been a fool's errand, a journey driven more by emotion than reason. But just as he was about to suggest they move on, one of the guides pointed to a distant shape, moving slowly through the grass. The man squinted against the sun, his breath catching in his throat. There, on the edge of the savannah, a lion was approaching. It was still too far to tell for sure. Something in the way it moved, the way it held itself, seemed familiar. The man's heart pounded as the lion drew closer, the moment of truth fast approaching. The lion moved with a measured, deliberate pace, each step bringing him closer to the small group that had settled beneath the shade of the acacia tree. From the distance, he appeared as a golden silhouette against the backdrop of the sunlit savannah. Powerful frame rippling with the strength and grace of a seasoned predator. The man watched with bated breath, his heart pounding in his chest as the lion drew nearer. Every instinct told him that this was the moment he had been waiting for. Yet doubt gnawed at the edges of his mind. Could this truly be the lion he had raised? The lion's approach was cautious but unhurried, his gaze fixed on the figures beneath the tree. The guides had gone silent, their hands resting on their weapons, ready to act if necessary. But the man barely noticed their tension. His eyes were locked on the lion, searching for any sign of recognition, any hint that the bond they had shared had not been lost to time and distance. As the lion drew closer, the man's breath caught in his throat. There was something in the way the lion moved, something familiar in the set of his shoulders and the intensity of his gaze. The man's heart leaped with hope, a hope that he had dared not voice, even to himself. He took a small step forward, his hand unconsciously reaching out, as if to bridge the gap between them. The lion stopped a few yards away, his massive head tilted slightly as he regarded the group with piercing amber eyes. For a moment, there was only silence, air between them thick with anticipation. The lion's nostrils flared as he caught the scent of the man, scent that carried with it the memories of a lifelong past. The man held his breath, his hands still outstretched, waiting for some sign, some acknowledgement from the creature before him. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, the lion took a step closer, his gaze never leaving the man's face. There was a flicker of recognition in his eyes, a spark that grew brighter as the lion sniffed the air again, more intently this time. Man's heart pounded, a mix of fear and hope swirling within him. He could see the lion's muscles tensing, his body poised as if deciding whether to advance or retreat. The lion moved again, closing the distance between them, and the man felt a rush of emotion as the gap narrowed to mere feet. The lion's expression shifted, the initial wariness giving way to something softer, something that the man had not dared to believe was possible. The lion paused, his eyes locked on the man's. For a brief moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, with a deep, resonant rumble, the lion lowered his head and nuzzled the man's outstretched hand. The man felt the rough warmth of the lion's fur against his palm, and in that instant, the years fell away, and they were no longer separated by time or distance. The lion had recognized him. Tears welled up in the man's eyes as he gently stroked the lion's mane, his heart swelling with a profound sense of relief and joy. He had feared that the lion would have forgotten him, that the wild had erased the bond they had once shared. Here, in this moment, all those fears were laid to rest. The lion remembered him, and not only that, he still trusted him. The guides, who had been watching the scene unfold with a mixture of awe and caution, slowly relaxed, lowering their weapons. They had never seen anything like this. A wild lion, fully grown and dominant, showing such affection toward a human. It was a moment that defied everything they knew about the behavior of wild animals, and they could hardly believe what they were witnessing. The lion leaned into the man's touch, his eyes closing in a gesture of trust and contentment. Man could feel the lion's powerful heartbeat beneath his hand, a steady rhythm that mirrored the beating of his own heart. He knelt down beside the lion, wrapping his arms around the massive creature in a gentle embrace. The lion responded by pressing his head against the man's shoulder, a low, contented rumble vibrating through his chest. For a long time, they stayed like that, the man and the lion, reunited in a moment that neither had ever truly expected. The man whispered softly to the lion, his voice choked with emotion as he spoke words of affection and gratitude. The lion, in turn, seemed to understand, body relaxed and his demeanor calm. The sun had begun its descent toward the horizon, casting a warm, golden light over the savannah. The man finally pulled back, gazing into the lion's eyes with a smile that was both joyful and bittersweet. He knew that this moment was a gift, brief reunion that he would treasure for the rest of his life. But he also knew that the lion belonged to the wild now, that he had found his place in the world, beyond the man's care. With a heavy heart, the man slowly stood up, his hand lingering on the lion's head for just a moment longer. "You've done well, my friend," he said softly. "I'm so proud of you." The lion gazed up at the man, his eyes reflecting a depth of understanding that went beyond mere instinct. He had grown into a powerful, independent creature, but the bond they had shared had not been broken. It had simply changed, evolved into something that could exist even across the vast distance between their worlds. The man took a step back, his eyes never leaving the lion's. The lion watched him, his expression calm and assured, as if he, too, understood. This was goodbye. The man's heart ached. He knew that this was the way it had to be. The lion had found his freedom, and the man would not take that away from him. With a final, lingering look, the man turned and began to walk away, his steps slow and deliberate. The lion watched him go, his gaze steady, until the man was a distant figure against the setting sun. The man felt the lion's presence behind him, comforting weight that he carried with him even as he moved further away. Finally, when the man had disappeared over the rise, the lion turned and walked back into the tall grasses of the savannah. He moved with the confidence and grace of a creature who knew his place in the world, king returning to his kingdom. The wild had claimed him, but the man's memory would always be a part of him, quiet echo in the vastness of his domain. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the savannah was bathed in the soft glow of twilight. The lion paused for a moment, his ears pricked as he listened to the sounds of the night. And then, with a final, resonant roar that echoed across the plains, disappeared into the darkness, a shadow among the shadows, but never truly alone. As the sun set behind the distant hills, man made his way back to the small camp that had been set up on the edge of the savannah. The warmth of the reunion with the lion lingered in his heart. With it came a bittersweet realization. Bond they shared, though powerful, was now something that existed in the spaces between their worlds. The lion belonged to the wild, and the man had to return to his own life, carrying the memory of their connection with him. The guides greeted him with a mixture of awe and respect, their earlier skepticism replaced by a deep admiration for what they had witnessed. They offered him food and water, but the man was lost in his thoughts, still processing the emotions of the day. He sat down by the campfire, flames casting flickering shadows on his face, and stared into the distance where the lion had disappeared. The memory of the lion's warm fur against his hand, trust in his eyes, played over and over in the man's mind. It was a moment he would never forget, a moment that had transcended the boundaries of species, time, and distance. The man felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude, not just for the reunion, but for everything the lion had taught him over the years. The lion had been more than just an animal in his care. He had been a friend, teacher, and a living reminder of the profound connections that can form between living beings. As the night deepened, the man found himself reflecting on the journey that had led him here. He thought about the young cub he had raised, the care and patience it had taken to guide him through those early years, and the day he had finally let him go. It had been one of the hardest decisions of his life, but it had also been the right one. The lion had thrived in the wild, become the king of his own domain, and that was something the man took great pride in. Yet, despite the lion's success in the wild, the bond they had shared had not been severed. It had simply evolved, growing into something more profound and enduring. The lion had remembered him, had trusted him, even after all those years apart. That trust was a testament to the connection they had formed, connection that had withstood the test of time, the challenges of the wild. The man knew that he would never see the lion again, at least not in the same way. Their lives had diverged, each following its own path. But the knowledge that the lion was out there, living the life he was meant to live, brought the man a sense. The bond they shared would always be there, unbreakable thread that connected them across the vastness of the savannah. As the fire crackled and the stars filled the sky, the man reached into his pack and pulled out the old leather-bound notebook that he had carried with him. He opened it to the first page, where he had recorded the lion's birth, and began to write. His hand moved slowly across the page, capturing the details of the day, the lion's approach, the moment of recognition, the warmth of their reunion. He wrote about the emotions that had filled him, the mixture of joy and sadness that had accompanied their farewell. The notebook had been a chronicle of the lion's life, from his earliest days as a cub to his release into the wild. Now, it would also hold the story of their reunion, a final chapter that completed the narrative of their shared journey. As the man wrote, he felt a sense of closure, quiet satisfaction in knowing that their story had come full circle. When he had finished writing, the man closed the notebook and held it in his hands for a moment, feeling the weight of the years it contained. He then carefully placed it back in his pack, knowing that it would be a cherished keepsake, a reminder of the bond that had changed his life. The night was cool and clear, and the man looked up at the stars, feeling a deep connection to the world around him. He knew that the lion was out there, somewhere beneath the same sky, continuing his life in the wild. The man smiled, a sense of contentment settling over him. The lion had found his place in the world, and now, so had the man. As he prepared to rest for the night, the man whispered a quiet thank you to the lion, knowing that their bond would never truly fade. It was a bond that had been forged in love and trust, and it would endure as long as the memory of their time together lived on. The man lay down by the fire, artful, and drifted off to sleep with a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. The savannah, the lion, and their shared journey became a part of him, a story that would remain with him forever. The man returned to his home, a place that now felt different, imbued with the quiet echoes of his journey to the savannah. Familiar surroundings of the reserve welcomed him back, but his thoughts often drifted to the wide-open plains, the golden grasses, and the lion who had found his rightful place in the world. Life at the reserve resumed its steady rhythm, but the man was changed, his heart lighter, his mind at peace, knowing that the bond he had feared lost had not only survived, but had also deepened. In the days and weeks that followed his return, man found himself sharing his story with others, colleagues, visitors to the reserve, and anyone who would listen. His tale of the lion who remembered him crossed the vast distances of time and wilderness to reconnect, captivated everyone who heard it. People were moved by the idea that such a bond could exist between man and beast, and the story spread, becoming something of a legend. The man's story had a profound impact on those who heard it. For many, it was a reminder of the deep connections that can form between humans and animals, connections that transcend the usual boundaries of understanding. It challenged the conventional view of wild animals as creatures driven purely by instinct, showing that they too remember, recognize, and even love. Visitors to the reserve often ask the man about the lion, eager to hear the details of their reunion. Each time, the man would recount the story, his voice filled with the same awe and emotion as when it had first happened. He spoke of the lion's cautious approach, the moment of recognition, and the warmth of their final farewell. And every time he told the story, he saw the same reactions: wonder, disbelief, and a deep sense of admiration for the lion's capacity to remember. The story also sparked a renewed interest in conservation and the ethical treatment of animals. Many who heard the tale were inspired to support efforts to protect wildlife and to rethink the ways in which humans interact with the natural world. The man's experience with the lion became a symbol of hope, a testament to the possibility of coexistence between humans and the wild. As for the man himself, the experience had given him a new perspective on his work. He continued to care for the animals at the reserve, but with a deeper understanding of the emotional lives they might lead. He knew now, more than ever, that the animals in his care were not just creatures to be managed, but beings with memories, emotions, and the capacity for connection. In the quiet moments of his days, the man would often sit with the old leather-bound notebook, turning its pages and reliving the memories of the lion's life. He would pause on the final entries, where he had recorded their reunion, and feel a swell of pride and love for the lion who had shown him the true depth of their bond. The notebook was more than just a record. It was a testament to the journey they had shared, a journey that had left an indelible mark on both their lives. The man's reflections on the lion and their bond became a source of wisdom that he shared with others. He spoke of the importance of trust, power of memory, and the unbreakable ties that can form between living beings, regardless of species. His words resonated with those who heard them, leaving a lasting impression on all who came to the reserve. As the years passed, the story of the lion who remembered his caretaker became a cherished part of the reserve's history, a tale passed down to new staff and visitors alike. It was a story that transcended time, a reminder that some bonds are too strong to be broken, even by the vastness of the wild. The man grew older, his hair graying and his steps slowing. The memory of the lion remained as vivid as ever. He often thought of the lion, wondering how he was faring in the savannah, whether he had formed a pride of his own, whether he still roamed the lands with the same grace and strength. The man knew that the lion was where he was meant to be, and that knowledge brought him comfort. In his final years, the man found peace in the knowledge that his life had been enriched by the bond he had shared with the lion. It was a bond that had taught him more about love, trust, and the power of connection than he had ever imagined. And as he looked back on his life, he knew that this bond, forged in the early days of the lion's life and reaffirmed in the wild, was the greatest gift he had ever received. The man's story, and the story of the lion who remembered, would live on, carried by those who had heard it and been touched by its message. It was a story of hope, love, and of the unbreakable bond that can exist between a man and a lion, a bond that transcended the boundaries of the human and animal worlds, and that would endure for generations to come.